The world had collapsed, like a building brought down by an explosion, its colors and hopes lost in ash and dust. Empires that had stood for centuries on money and power fell overnight, like towers swept away by a storm. Their leaders, who once thought themselves masters of the world, vanished in a merciless silence. No screams, no trace of their existence. Yet there were still those who believed they could resist, unaware that he, Mouood, was no longer just a shadow of the past. He had come to rule, not with weapons or words, but with a force born of darkness, a silence that devoured everything. The commanding officer stood, a shadow of the past, with eyes filled with broken pride and deep exhaustion. His uniform, once pristine, was now dusty and torn, yet his insignias still gleamed on his chest. He looked at his soldiers, pale men with trembling hands, their headphones in place, their breath visible in the cold. He wanted to give them hope, to convince himself there was still something worth fighting for. But deep down, he might have already known it was a futile effort. His voice echoed through the square like a broken signal, a desperate cry to push back defeat. The soldiers and drones opened fire, bullets and lasers flashing in the air. The people recoiled, their screams drowned by the roar of weapons. But then, the ground trembled, a sound rising from its depths, and a massive shadow emerged from the center of the square. A shadow that was power itself, carrying the end within it. He arrived, Mouood, with a silence that smothered everything, with a presence heavier than any explosion. His dark robe billowed in the wind, his hair flowing like the night, and his eyes, bottomless voids, consumed all before him. Bullets turned to dust in his presence, the earth cracked beneath his steps, and the soldiers fell like deactivated machines, not in blood, but in a silence that stole their breath. And then, silence. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of surrender, but the silence before revelation, before judgment. The air grew heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The ground trembled, not from war, but from something far greater, something inevitable. He stood there, untouched, unmoved, the weight of centuries in his eyes, the void of eternity in his presence. And now, he would speak.
I have not come to warn. I have not come to forgive. I have not come to offer another chance. Yourselves eternal, who claim the earth as your inheritance, who chained fate and called it justice. Now you stand at the end of the road. Behind you, the wall. Before you, are buried in the dust. Your name's lost in the storm. Your false gods burn to ashes.
He rebuilt the world, not for salvation, but for his own dominion, so that every movement and breath depended on him. Cities rose from the ruins, but their skyscrapers were black, their shadows covering the ground. The sky remained dark. Flags trembled in the wind. The people who once saw him as their savior now worked with wounded hands, their eyes hollow, their silence born from fear. The hum of machines echoed like the heartbeat of a soulless world, and every day the darkness inside him deepened. He had destroyed the corrupt, but now he had become corruption itself. His heart was empty of all that once made him human. At the heart of this world was a vast, cold hall, its walls covered with digital screens displaying his victories. He sat on a metallic throne, his dark robes heavy in the air, his fingers idly tapping the armrest. Assistants, their eyes lifeless, presented him with gifts, advanced tools, precious metals, treasures that in this dim light held no meaning. He picked up a device, studied it for a moment, then crushed it with ease. The fragments fell silently, like something that had lost all value. He rose from his throne, slow, deliberate, walking toward a window overlooking his city, its streets grey, its lights dim. Below, workers labored to construct an enormous structure. One of them, overcome with exhaustion, collapsed. His tool clattered on the ground. Mouood watched with indifference, then, with a slight gesture, stole the worker's life away, like shutting down a machine. The others, terrified, continued working. No one dared look up. He had become a force that had forgotten mercy. But in the corners of this world, in dark underground hideouts, rebels gathered. The dim glow of a phone cast shadows on the walls. A weary-faced man placed an old gun on the table. A woman with disheveled hair revealed a digital map. They had not surrendered, not for victory, but for something that still lived in their hearts. Something that perhaps could bring him back to himself. He was tired. The rebellions never ended. He crushed them every time. With death, with fear, with silence. And now the silence he had created was not born of peace, but of terror. He was exhausted from forcing the world into submission over and over again. If they are silent out of fear, is this truly my kingdom? He had built something he now despised. For a moment, he closed his eyes. A vision formed in his mind, a world with no pain, no war, no souls left to defy him, an empty world, ultimate release. He thought, just thought, and the world unraveled. Kings and beggars, lovers and murderers, all fell with a single command. No screams, no wails, no tremors, just silence. One breath, and the world was empty. It was done. The world was nothing more than a mass grave. At last, he had achieved what he desired, absolute peace. But suddenly, something inside him broke. His heart, once filled with the pulse of power, was now hollow. He was alone, and a God who stands alone is a God who is dead. The power that had devoured the world was now devouring him. He was no longer a man. He was pure force, and such force must end. So he gave one final command to himself. One breath, and he was no more. Silence, but not absolute. Soft voices, small footsteps, children. They were still alive, the youngest, the purest. Those who did not build the world, but merely played in it. His power had not worked on them. Perhaps it never could. And in the heart of all this death, a smile was born. Not out of understanding, but out of innocence. And that was something even the God of Darkness had failed to destroy. The end?